I've had an interest in film criticism for almost as long as I've had an interest in film. I like good criticism because it helps you understand a film better and have a better appreciation for why a person liked a film and what it was doing. But I love bad criticism because it's really funny. That enjoyment has tapered over the years as websites figured out that cynically harvesting hate clicks from people coming to jeer at an intentionally bad take is way easier and more reliable than trying to attract people with actually good writing. But a genuinely bad film review is still something wonderful to find in the wild. I think that to this day, one of the most reliably funny sources of bad reviews I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing was a weekly movie review column called Current Releases. It ran on the front page of the comedy website Something Awful from 2009 to 2014, and during that time it was a font of amazing hot takes, contrarian posturing, and sincere outrage over things that usually weren't very outrageous. One week, they might be talking about their war on Christmas-esque war on cinema, where the existence of Redbox and Marvel movies meant that 2013 was certain to be remembered as the year that cinema entered its death throes. Or perhaps multiple pages of a male critic using the release of Jennifer's Body to call Diablo Cody a misandrist and telling her that she should go back to stripping. This chauvinism, though, this is the worst sin Cody has committed, this unwavering and unabashed indictment of the male gender that permeates every sentence of her screenplays. I went into Jennifer's Body expecting what I received from Juno, the most repellent display of misandry ever to be given an award by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I was not disappointed. Jennifer's Body continues Cody's tradition of inserting men, I say men, but eunuchs would be a more appropriate term, into roles in which they are utterly devoid of any real identifiable emotion beyond a drive for sex, and they are incapable of displaying even a modicum of common civility. Quite honestly, these are the most infuriatingly neutered male characters I have ever encountered in film. Matt Gronk. Another week might bring a review of Inglourious Basterds that gives it a negative 90 out of 50 using nothing but 2 paragraphs of homophobic oral sex analogies and a caption calling Quentin Tarantino a child molester because he isn't traditionally attractive. I feel at this point that it's worth pointing out that these reviews aren't all the work of one person. They were written by a rotating door of the members and moderators of Something Awful's film subforum, Cinema Discusso. The subforum has been widely mocked by other posters on the site for basically its entire existence due to the popular conception that the people who posted it are a combination of really pretentious and incredibly stupid. Which again is really saying something considering how pretentious and stupid the average Something Awful poster is. There have been a few posters from there that have gone on to greater success, like popular YouTuber H-Bomber Guy and American Pie sequel actor turned IMDb staff writer Brandon Hardesty. But for the most part, it's a place that's so bad that the site eventually had to make a completely separate film discussion subforum because so many people actively refused to post with the regulars from Cinema Discusso. And reading these reviews, you definitely see why. Despite the variety of writers, almost every update to current releases has at least one line or quote or take that is so bad you can't help but laugh. It's also really weird because Cinema Discusso has the reputation of being a super loony lefty place, but reading the reviews, there's a strong reactionary streak in place whenever it comes to anything popular. In addition to all that complaining about how uppity Diablo Cody is, anytime Michael Moore is mentioned, they just call him fat and stupid and a liar, and in one particularly bizarre tangent, write about your penis being removed and given to him as an offering. There's a write-up of 2009's Capitalism: A Love Story, a documentary presenting what is now recognized as incredibly pedestrian and common criticisms of institutions like health insurance and predatory lending, that just outright accuses Michael Moore of lying about everything and then compares it to your grandma getting raped. It's a really fascinating time capsule of that first term of the Obama administration when a bunch of shitty dudes with no class consciousness thought they were woke because they voted for a black president. It's kind of a shame that pretty much everybody involved with current releases deleted or abandoned their social media for reasons I'll go over later in this video, because I would love to see which of them are still writing and what it looks like now compared to then. Another really funny thing about current releases was that most of the people writing for it idolized Armond White. If the name sounds familiar to you, you might recall one of the many instances over the years in which he invited a lot of attention on himself for being the sole negative review of an otherwise universally praised film. He was, and is, an incredibly abrasive contrarian. As is par for the course with contrarians, it turns out that he wasn't actually a Machiavellian puppet master, but was just a shitty dude. And in 2014, he was kicked out of the New York Film Critics Circle for getting into fights with people and yelling profanity at directors during public events. As is fitting for an obnoxious contrarian, he currently writes for the conservative rag The National Review, and spends a lot of time online complaining about cancel culture and censorship. Just the worst dude, and being a fan of his, then or now, is a huge red flag. Anyways, the reason I bring up their love of Armond White is that they also fancy themselves contrarians, but it manifested in really bizarre ways. Like, one of the highest review scores that they ever gave was to the 2011 remake of Footloose, seemingly almost entirely because they were doing the Tim and Eric mind-blown gif IRL to the fact that a movie about bridging generational gaps was itself bridging a generational gap in being made. Like, whoa, just... holy shit, dude. What were they smoking when they came up with that? Kitty. Another interesting thing about current releases is that Something Awful is ostensibly supposed to be a comedy website. This film review column is being served between collections of funny photoshops and wacky cartoons about gaming, and a lot of the complaints at the time were how this really angry and unfunny sincere film review column didn't fit in at all, so they started adding jokes. Really, really bad jokes. Like, instead of writing an actual review for Where the Wild Things Are, they write this weird tangent about the monsters in it being so sexy that the author starts turning tricks in the movie theater bathroom, or rating movies with furry cheesecake art instead of actual numerical ratings. You know, it's a joke, because it's funny. Anyways, the beginning of the end for current releases came on Sunday, August 18th in 2013, when Ian Madison, a moderator of Cinema Discusso who went by the screen name of Professor Clumsy, wrote his review for Disney's Planes. Yeah, the glorified direct-to-DVD spin-off of Pixar's Car franchise.
Yeah! What? Oh, man, that's nasty.
And aside from some really hacky jokes about how much Dane Cook sucks, it's not actually that bad of a concept for a review. It's mostly about how the movie's politics are bad and weird because of how it uses class and nationality in the way that it anthropomorphizes planes, and also how the sexual dimorphism between male and female plane characters is really sexist and arbitrary. Both are totally valid points and something I would normally be totally into or maybe even be talking about myself. But the review had one line that immediately catapulted it into infamy. The female planes are apparently designed by someone who has no idea what a female plane would look like. It's just such a hilariously bad line. On the surface, it's an immediately ridiculous statement. What would a female plane look like? But it's also really funny on a deeper level because Professor Clumsy is, well, clumsily arguing against his own point. He's criticizing the portrayal of female planes for not being what he imagines a female plane should look like, rather than criticizing the idea that there's any one correct way of expressing gender. If you want to be really uncharitable, you could even read it as him telling on himself and his lack of actual knowledge about gender identity and gendered representation, which I totally will because that's just the funnier option. It's bad writing, it's bad criticism, and it's bad social justice all wrapped up in one delicious sentence. Mwah. Current releases had quietly existed on the front page, mostly observed and discussed by members of Cinema Discusso, but as time went on, more and more people outside of the community became aware of its existence as bad quotes from it were posted in other places on the site. And the female plane quote was one that spread immediately after it was posted and attracted lots of new critical attention to the column. The common refrain was that Something Awful was supposed to be a comedy site, and that if it had a movie review column, it should be a comedic one. As you might imagine, rather than taking these criticisms in stride and being secure and confident in the work that they were doing, the current releases crew did not handle these naysayers well, dismissing them as boring trolls, telling them if they didn't like it they could leave or write their own column, or implying that their criticisms were just anti-intellectualism from people who are unwilling to, quote, turn their brain on. Planes, by Ian Professor Clumsy Madison. Planes is a very colorful film. The colors are bright and varied and often move across the screen in ways that will please infants. Colors are fun, and so is movement. It's like when you shake your car keys at a baby and they just want to reach out and grab them. That was me watching Planes. "Want," I said as I reached out to the screen, only to be shushed by my dad. This was the first time he had spoken to me in 2 days, which might as well has been forever because I am only 2 years old. 50 out of 50. That's his feather light lampooning of people who say his comment is bad. You're literally a baby. In fact, Professor Clumsy doubled down and spewed even more cartoonist vitriol at Disney's Planes in his big end-of-year film write-up. This was in reference to my review of Planes, a film in which Dane Cook is forced to be castrated in order to become a better racer. His crop duster, the stand-in for his genitalia, has no utility as a sexual organ or as anything else, and so its loss is reduced to a pure symbolic stripping of his masculinity, as the otherwise useless appendage is forcibly removed to the bemusement of the children of the audience. Planes has to be one of the most potentially harmful films ever to come out of the Hollywood system. Jeez, read the room, dude. There are no shortage of people on YouTube that I would gladly listen to discuss castration metaphors and anthropomorphic vehicles, but doing it as a snotty parting shot at people complaining that you're a humorless blowhard is absolutely not the time and place for it. Anyways, this continued to be a point of contention. At the end of 2013, a series of bizarre events occurred across Something Awful that I could and probably will one day dedicate an entire video to, but the short of it is that on Halloween of 2013, the posting culture and moderation strategy of the entire site permanently changed literally overnight. After years of strict moderation, the rules were struck aside and people were allowed to post slurs and bully posters they didn't like and no longer had to use proper spelling or punctuation. And as we now know happens when people like this get their way, giving them what they wanted just made them push for even more power and control over the site and its culture. The number of active users on the site dropped geometrically as people either self-banned in protest or were driven off by what it had become, and the front page writers that remained found themselves at the mercy of their new audience. Come 2014, the people who ran the site finally gave the smallest compromise to critics of current releases. The current releases crew still had the pretty sweet deal of getting paid to write about whatever movies they wanted, however they wanted, but their column would also feature one single review written for the explicit purposes of comedy by a person who wasn't a member of their local club. The person who wound up testing this was Jom, G0M. I never know how to pronounce internet names like this, but they're a pretty popular and successful weird Twitter person. So after pretty unexceptional reviews of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and Snowpiercer, which are exactly what you'd expect from the current releases crew, we get Gom's review of Mrs. Brown's Boys Da Movie. It's not amazing or anything, but it has actual jokes in it, and as a deliberate attempt at trolling the current releases boys, it's great. Multiple paragraphs of the review is dedicated to making fun of the format, joking that people reading or film reviews only care about the numerical score and that the words don't matter, and concluding with them openly admitting that they never even saw the movie and they just played video games instead because it's a superior form of entertainment. It even managed to get a lot of praise from people within the community, both those who had been critical of past current releases, and those who supported it but still enjoyed the change of pace and the injection of some new comedy. As you'd imagine, this was not something that current releases reacted positively to. Still washing out the current releases office, Joe's cum and Fayad's shit is a noxious cocktail and the bane of my existence. Sean Keanu Reeves Hansen. Absolute shite. I wouldn't have run it, and frankly I'm embarrassed to have it published under my name. He was so upset that the parting shot about cleaning out his office wound out not to be an idle threat. He locked his Twitter and would only be credited for one more article a few weeks later. When Planes, Fire and Rescue came and went without a review, it was officially announced that Professor Clumsy had quietly stepped down in the past few weeks. The column started bringing in a few new authors to keep it going, but it was obvious that things were not going well behind the scenes because, again, just driving this home, they had been forced to suffer the indignity of sharing web space with a joke review one time. And I mean one time. It would never happen again. Gom would continue to write for the front page and later go on to be a pretty successful zine creator on Patreon, but they were not invited back to current releases. So here we are, all this backstory and set dressing just to give you the context and get you in the proper headspace for what is, true to the title of this video, the worst film review I've ever read. A review so bad that it single-handedly destroyed a column that had run for almost half a decade and caused almost everyone involved with it to commit social media seppuku. On October 5th, 2014, the current releases film review column on the comedy website Something Awful published a review of the David Fincher film Gone Girl. It dropped just 2 days after the film premiered in theaters, so it wasn't a rush job or a last-minute thing. This was something that someone had days to write, edit, think over, and make absolutely sure that it was what they wanted to put out into the world. The review was not credited to any current releases member, past or present. It was instead attributed to the titular Gone Girl, Amazing Amy Dunn. Presumably this was done out of cowardice because anybody who had any hope of continuing to write about film in any capacity at all would not want this hateful, embarrassing screed on their record. This is it. This is the worst film review I've ever read, and now I'm going to read it to you. Just a heads up, this review is full of massive spoilers for the film Gone Girl, and my critique of it will be similarly spoiler-filled. So if you haven't seen it and you think you might want to, this is your chance to hold off until you have. Also, after I read the review, I'm going to try and discuss this in a way that a person with zero familiarity with the film can understand, but having seen the movie yourself will definitely help your appreciation of this. Also, huge content warning for the review. There's a lot of descriptions of sexual violence, self-harm, suicide, some slurs. It's just really upsetting in general. Here we go. Gone Girl by Amazing Amy Dunn. Dear Amy, I don't know how to tell my friends not to spoil movies that I haven't seen yet. How do I get them to stop? Unspoiled in Carthage, Mississippi. Suck it up. I love spoilers, and there's going to be a lot in today's column. Dear Amy, I've been dating my boyfriend for 8 years now, and we're not even engaged. But every time I see a baby on the street, I feel my biological clock tick-tick-ticking. Unfortunately, he's not ready to commit. much less be a father. He's so paranoid, he insists on using condoms, even though I'm on season now. But I'm ready. I'm more than ready. Don't you think it's time for us to talk? Unpregnant in Carthage, Mississippi. You said he insists on using a condom. That's good news. Let me tell you why. No one's forcing you to take birth control, although I'd still flush one per day in case you get suspicious. Count 2 weeks back from the start of your next period. On that day, and for 5 days after, insist on having sex as often as possible. Once he's asleep, turn that condom inside out. Bam! You've got a golden ticket to a veritable fountain of baby juice, even if you might have to do a little squeegeeing to get a workable amount. I'll let you figure out how to handle it from here. Hint, it involves a turkey baster and a little KY. If he asks any questions, remind him that all birth control has a failure rate, then slam your own head into a banister and threaten to tell everyone he hit you for getting pregnant. He'll have no choice to stay with you. Best of luck. Dear Amy, last week at the height of an argument, my hubby slammed my face against the wall and called me a cunt. Immediately, I packed my things and headed off to the women's shelter, but I'm wondering if there was another way to handle that situation. Unbecunted in Carthage, Mississippi. Oh, Unbecunted, I'm a little disappointed in you. A women's shelter? You don't want to be one of those women, do you? I know I sure don't. So let's rewind this a little bit. He slams your face against the wall and calls you a cunt. Here's what you should have said. I'm the cunt you married. Good one, right? That kind of zinger is the stepping stone to a healthier marriage, one built on violence and mutual distrust. Dear Amy, I never thought I'd write these words, but my husband is cheating on me. The man of my dreams has turned those dreams to ash, our mutual trust dispersing like so many sugar storms. I want to confront him about it and possibly work out our marriage, but I just don't know how to approach him. What should I do? Uncertain in Carthage, Mississippi. Confrontation is for the weak. So is divorce. Near as I could tell, you have one option. Frame him for your murder. When people see he brutally murdered his wife, they'll all see him for the monster you know him to be. Lucky for you, all you need is a blank journal, a handful of pens, a little rubber tubing, and a few common household items. Step 1. Backdate your journal to the day you met and write about how awesome he is. Step 2. As you work forward, gradually hint that he may have a violent streak. It's important to use different pens here to avoid the impression that you wrote it all in one sitting. That's the first thing the police would suspect because it's not like people who journal have favorite pens. Step 3. Bleed yourself, a little at a time. This will come in handy when you're staging the crime scene later. Freeze the blood, or refrigerate it, or keep it in the pantry. It's not like forensic techs can tell how fresh your blood is. Step 4. Steal some urine from a pregnant friend. This step is optional because even I'm not sure how the fuck you would use this to your advantage. Forensic techs can definitely test your blood for HCG, and they do that long before they'd subpoena your medical records. But, go ahead and get a positive pregnancy test on file. It can't hurt. Step 5. Once you've gotten to the point in your journal where "this man may kill me" is the organic conclusion to an entry, it's time to put your plan into action. Throw blood around your kitchen like you're in Sweeney Todd, and make only a cursory effort to wipe it up. You want the blood to show in a luminol sweep so it looks like he did it, and lazy man that he is, took a swipe at it with a little 409 and the Swiffer. Then leave your diary in an obvious, but not too obvious, place so the police are guaranteed to find it. Step 6. Drive around a while and bloviate to no one. Your plan is fucking sweet, and people need to know, even if your audience is none but a lonely Drown yourself in the nearest lake or river. I'll be honest, dying is a pretty significant drawback, but who wants to live if they can't work things out with a lying, cheating idiot? Dear Amy, I'm writing a novel and I feel maybe it's just a touch too breezy. How can I give it some thematic heft? Unliterary in Carthage, Mississippi. Toss in some shit about the recession. It's still topical. If you really want to connect with readers, remind them that homeless people are scary. Boo! Entertainment Weekly layoffs are tragedies of Shakespearean proportions, and the sound of a trust fund dwindling is the saddest music in all the world. Dear Amy, after arguing with my husband nonstop for hours last night, I left. With nowhere else to go, and no money for a hotel, I decided to stay at my ex-boyfriend's house. He keeps hitting on me. What should I do? Unhappy in Carthage, Mississippi. Seduce him, bite him so it looks like self-defense, slash his throat as he comes, and instead of calling the cops, calmly drive home and walk onto your husband's arms, covered in blood. Dear Amy, last week my boyfriend broke up with me and I'm having a hard time getting over him. Any advice? Tell him to fuck you really hard until you're good and bruised, then tell the police you were raped. Duh. Dear Amy, my husband and I are about to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary. Thing is, I always feel like I put more effort into finding a thoughtful, wrap a length of twine around your wrist and twist it until you bleed, then tell the police you were raped. Duh. Dear Amy, I keep asking my boyfriend to put the goddamn seat down, smear some wine on your undies and run around screaming in front of a surveillance camera, then tell the police you were raped. Duh. Dear Amy, shove a wine bottle up your ass and thrust until you can no longer walk, then tell the police you were raped. Duh. Look, I don't know why I have to repeat myself. This should be your go-to solution. Consider all other advice to be a sound plan B. Why? Because the cops never ignore rape victims, and accused rapists are always convicted on the strength of the victim's testimony. Dear Amy, I'm currently dating a men's rights activist, and that kind of guy is a real keeper in this age of nervous, post-feminist men. Trouble is, you can only go to the putt-putt course so many times before the little plastic gnomes begin to haunt your dreams. Do you have any fun date night ideas? Unliberated in Carthage, Mississippi. Ask him, politely and sweetly, to take you to see Gone Girl. You can thank me later. In no way does this movie about me play on shitty cultural assumptions about rape. I now have a fetish for Doogie Howser's bloody dick. I now have a fetish for a quarter of the head of Batman's dick. Where was David Fincher? Not directing, that's for sure. I'm a total sociopath. Even as a puppet master, nothing I do makes sense whatsoever. Overall, 0 out of 50. So yeah, where do I begin? First and foremost, I think it's worth mentioning that Gone Girl, both the book and the screenplay, were written by a woman. Her name is Gillian Flynn. Death of the author is a thing, but this horrible review seems to exist entirely because the writer of it felt a visceral discomfort with the subject matter of the film and projected it onto an imaginary woman hater who is creating the film to be instructive about how women are lying whores when this is objectively not the case. And I totally get how a surface reading of the film's plot, where a woman frames her husband for her own murder and basically gets away with it, could come across that way. When your whole gimmick is supposed to be, and I'm bringing this quote out again for you, turning your brain on and giving the hard-hitting criticisms that people can't find elsewhere, it's incredibly intellectually lazy to not examine that in any way or do any research. Because there is tons of writing about Gone Girl as a postmodern feminist work of fiction, including a lot of good criticism of the way that it uses sexist concepts and myths to its own ends. I'm not even a very big fan of Gone Girl. I think it's one of my least favorite David Fincher movies I've seen so far, and I have plenty of criticisms of it myself, but going this hard on such a fundamental failure to engage with the film you're literally being paid to write is just, ugh. Also, fun fact about Gillian Flynn, before she was a novelist, she was a professional television critic for Entertainment Weekly. It's such a delicious irony that a group of people so deeply invested in being seen as professional critics wound up ultimately being undone by the work of somebody who was literally a professional critic. Like, I could not put a neater button on that if I tried. And even outside of the script, the director David Fincher may be known for tackling dark subject matter, but he has a pretty good track record with women characters. His earlier credits include female-led films like Alien 3 and Panic Room, and one of his most well-known films is all about toxic masculinity and how aimless and dissatisfied men can be radicalized by giving them a sense of purpose. There's some stuff about the character of Lisbeth and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo that makes me roll my eyes, but it's all from the source material, and compared to the Swedish film where she looks like what J.C. Penney would think a goth looks like, his version of her looks and acts so much like some queer women I've known in my life. It's really hard to believe that anyone with even the slightest familiarity with his work could think he was a five-dimensional chess master trying to secretly push a misogynistic fear and hatred of women onto the audience. And even if you did, even the most cursory of glances would show David Fincher speaking plainly of his intentions with the film in many, many interviews. Everybody's doing the hero's journey, so this is the anti-hero's journey. I was most interested in the idea of narcissism as a way to hold two people together. How living in the age of social media has made everyone more accustomed to recontextualizing their shortcomings. Nothing about finally being able to put those lying females in their place or whatever else this review is rambling about. The gimmick of writing the review as if it was an advice column being penned by the titular character of the film is also awful because it shows how vapid their understanding of her character is. Even in the times where we see the character of Amy Dunn acting vulnerable or submissive as part of her Machiavellian plans, there's nothing resembling this weird passive-aggressive scold they seem to have interpreted the character as. For someone whose scorched earth take on the film is supposedly driven by moral outrage that it's irredeemably sexist and demeaning to women, they themselves are cartoonishly incapable of even imagining, much less writing in, the voice of a woman. I gotta say, it's kinda sexist. And I know what you're thinking. If the article wasn't attributed to an author, how do you know a man wrote it? After all, the original Current Releases crew were all men, but the last few weeks before this saw several new female authors, including their first and only all-female review issue. Well, that week's current releases had 5 articles and ended with 5 authors' Twitter accounts being plugged. Of those 5, the only one whose name wasn't attached to an article was that of Sean Keanu Greaves Hansen. So by process of elimination, it seems like a pretty safe bet that he's the one behind it. Also, looking over his other reviews, the same weird reflexive anger at any female character being a flawed character pops up over and over. Half of his retrospective on Spider-Man 2 is calling the film misogynistic because Mary Jane dates a different man after being abandoned by Peter Parker, which means that the movie is all about how women are lying whores. Same with his review for the film Only God Forgives, whose thesis is that the film is, quote, morally problematic and openly misogynistic because the main characters are criminals that do bad things, and one of them happens to be a woman. It's just such an empty, facile understanding of storytelling that I would just genuinely feel bad for the dude, were he not just so unlikable. Just imagine having so little respect for women that they aren't allowed to be villains or even share responsibility for bad things in fiction. It's also why I feel confident saying that this was a genuine review and not some attempt at trolling or trying to get current releases shut down on his own terms. This is a thing he's been doing for literal years. It only just came to a head in this particular spectacular disaster. Also, I hate the character gimmick just out of personal preference. That's the reason I don't do comedy sketches in these videos, or use an animated avatar, or play a character, or sit on my bed staring down the barrel of a camera. I make videos the way I like to watch them, even if it means you're less likely to be picked up by the algorithm or develop the kind of parasocial audience that puts you in the big leagues. It also sucks as a piece of criticism because it doesn't tell you anything about the movie. It doesn't even function as a content warning because you have no way of telling which of the unhinged ramblings about rape is actually something that happened in the film and which is just something the author made up to be shocking. The author conveys the way that the events of the film made them feel, but they don't feel the need to actually explain why they reacted that way, instead taking it as entirely self-evident. It says a lot about the person writing it, but very little about the film itself and whether or not it's something that the reader might enjoy or get value out of watching. The reaction to this review being posted was swift, with a chorus of, "What in the goddamn hell is this shit?" filling the feedback thread. By this point, the writers had long since stopped posting there because they were tired of dealing with the criticism from others, so they got about a week to enjoy their victory lap before the final installment of current releases dropped on October 12th, 2014. It ended with a 2-sentence parting shot. Speaking of seeing oneself out, this is the final edition of Something Awful's current releases. For more of the CR crew and their semi-straightforward opinions, join them over at Front Row Central. And, like that, current releases was no more. Front Row Central would run from 2014 to 2018, featuring the writing of former current releases members as well as newcomers, their only real impact on the world of criticism being getting a review quote on the back cover of a 2018 film called Higher Power. The site itself has been dead for years, but its Twitter account is still up, and I gotta give them credit. They currently have a whopping 20 more followers than my personal account does. So I guess in the end they did come out ahead after all. One last thing, just in the name of fairness, I feel the need to point out that a lot of the people complaining about current releases were pretty terrible themselves. It was really disappointing that I had to leave the majority of it out of my video just because of all the people still using comedy slurs at the point where everyone really should have known better. I did manage to get this post at least. It's a pretty good encapsulation of all the bad objections to current releases. Dudes that are really worked up about feminists and Marxists posting cringe about how caring about things is bad, actually. To end on a somewhat positive note, like a lot of people who are into criticism, I have a good amount of respect and admiration for Roger Ebert, and seeing this entire sad odyssey played out in the miniature reminds me of a good piece of advice that Siskel and Ebert gave to young movie critics in one of their specials.
Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of critics are almost shy about confessing that they've had any kind of emotional reaction.
Right. You have to summon up the courage, just as you were saying, to say what you honestly feel. Wanting to be liked is another piece of advice I would give.
You've really put your finger on something.
The parting shot that a member of the Something Awful administration team left when they announced the closing of the column was that, at one point, current releases was the third most read section of the website. If current releases really was so comparatively popular behind the scenes, then it just drives home how good a piece of advice Roger Ebert's was about having confidence in your words and not being afraid of having people disagree with you over them. Professor Clumsy and Keanu Greaves had a platform for years, and they could have kept that gravy train going who knows how long, and instead they lost it all because they couldn't deal with being disliked. I guess if nothing else, it's a nice reminder to stay humble. After all, if these people could build and throw away careers writing about film, really, what's stopping you from? And speaking of staying humble, as always, thanks for watching my videos. And as always, I will be back in the future with more, hopefully, fun and interesting things. I know this is a little bit of a departure, but at the same time, researching this kind of brought back a lot of fun early 2010s internet sagas I can start writing about and doing videos about. So keep an eye out for those. And as always, if you like my videos, subscribe to them so I know people are watching. All right, well, thank you, and have a good day. There it is, the worst film review I have ever read in my entire life.
So yeah, it was that last one that made me finally get what this person was saying. Like they really just think this is a movie for like men's right activists. What?
Yeah,
that's so stupid.
He genuinely believes that the movie having a female character who is evil and like fakes a pregnancy and like manipulates a man. The reason why he did this because he secretly believes that's what women really are all like, and that a movie is an attempt to normalize that. It's like the Great Replacement shit alt-right people do, but from the left. It's just I'm glad this exists just so I can look at it and I can go, I'm glad that's not me.
Yeah. No, I would definitely delete my social media if I ever posted something this terrible. A review this stupid and not understanding of the fucking media I just watched.
Yeah, like this is this is a person who like writes columns about about the death of cinema and then turns around and fails to understand like just like, incredibly basic thrillers for like adult audiences. Like
yeah.